Hey book nerds, welcome to my channel. So today I'm doing my April wrap-up. I mentioned in my Snakes and Ladders TBR video, but I have been on a little bit of a hiatus, so I'm going to do my wrap-ups in a kind of weird way. I'm going to upload my April one first, which is this one, and then I will go back, edit the January one I filmed, the February one I filmed, film my March one, and then they'll be posted at various times. But yeah, so this is the April one. In April, I read a total of 10 books, which isn't necessarily a lot for me, but it was pretty good given the circumstances. And in general, my reading was pretty good as well. I had one 2.5 star read, two 3-star reads, one 3.5 star read, four 4-star reads, two 4.5 star reads, and one 5-star read, but that was a reread. And yeah, I read a variety of things. I'm just going to sort of talk through them. Listened to a lot of audiobooks this month actually. I got a Script subscription and that had a ton of more modern releases that I wasn't expecting, so I listened to quite a few audiobooks, which is really nice. But yeah, without further ado, let's start going through them. So the first book I listened to was an audiobook, and it was Bright Burning Stars by A.K. Small. This I picked up because it's a young adult contemporary about ballet dancers and like a ballet school, and it's basically, I loved tiny pretty things in shiny broken pieces. I think that's like a duology about dance schools, and I picked this up because I was hoping it would be like that. And it kind of is. I gave this 4 stars out of 5. It's about two girls primarily. One is a French girl, one is an American girl. I can't remember their names now, but they both attend this prestigious ballet school. And it's really harsh, and they're in their final year. Basically, if you don't do well enough, you get kicked out immediately. Not even before the end of the year, just like people are getting kicked out throughout the year. And there is this boy who is like the golden, shall we say, like the golden prince of the school. And the American girl, Kate, I believe is her name, she starts a relationship with him and it goes badly, and the French girl has stuff of her own going on. This was good. It felt long, and I don't know if that's because I listened to it as an audiobook rather than reading it. I read faster than I listen, so it felt long and like there wasn't tons going on. And I liked the ending a lot. The ending wasn't what I was expecting, and I really liked that. Tiny pretty things or tiny little things is better. Like both of those books are better than this book, but this was enjoyable. I'm glad I read it. I would definitely recommend it if you're into kind of, it's not even that, I wanted more dynamic between the two friends. I wanted more of their friendship and more of how like the darkness was affecting that specifically. But the problem is that they don't actually seem that close throughout the story, and not in a fighting way, just like they don't interact as much as I kind of wanted, which is a shame. So that kind of aspect was missing, or wasn't as strong as I wanted it to be. But yeah, it was still really good. Young adult contemporary. It was still 4 stars, still better than most things, which yeah, it was enjoyable. I would recommend it. The next book I read I remember very little about, sadly, but it was Colour Outside the Lines. This is a collection edited by Sangu, Mandanna, and it's all about interracial romances, and there's poems and mostly short stories. This was really good, I do remember that. I gave it 3.5 stars, and I can't remember any of the details about the stories, but there's like a variety of stuff in here. It's not just all contemporary, which I did appreciate. I really liked that aspect to it. I just think in general the writing wasn't strong enough for me to love it, or it wasn't enough of the kind of stories that I like to read. But yeah, it was enjoyable. I did like the variety. There's a lot of different interracial relationships. There's a lot of stuff done with that kind of format, and it's not just the same thing again and again, which I did appreciate. And they're all own voices, I believe, which I can't comment on as a white person, obviously, but it felt like a good representation in terms of I felt like I learned a lot. So yeah, I really think this kind of collection's a great idea, and I think there should be more of them. I didn't say, but this was an arc that I got ages ago, and with all of my arcs I write full reviews, so I'll post the full review down below, like a link to it on my blog. Same goes for all the other arcs that I read and mention in this wrap-up. The next book I read was perhaps the arc I've been the most excited about in my life, and that was Pretending by Holly Bourne. This is called something else, which I don't remember off the top of my head, but I will put the alternative title down below, but I know it as Pretending, so that's what I'm going to talk about it as. Holly Bourne is an incredible writer who will completely obliterate you, rip you apart, and then build you back up again. And her books are an emotional, I don't want to say slog, because slog's a bad word, but it's an emotional journey. This is a adult contemporary. This is her second ever adult contemporary. I gave it 4.5 stars out of 5, and it was incredible. It was really, really good. Massive trigger warnings for this book for sexual assault, anxiety, mostly the sexual assault stuff. This is the story of a woman who has been sexually assaulted in her past, and she also works for a charity where she deals with giving advice to people who have been sexually assaulted. And it's her trying to form a romance, and then she kind of loses her mind a little bit and goes, no, I am not doing this anymore. So she decides to be this fake perfect woman to date a man, so she can kind of like get her revenge on men by like tricking this man into loving her. It sounds like an insane premise. It is actually grounded in reality. It's not like that premise sounds like a zany rom-com, and it's not a zany rom-com. It's a quite intense contemporary, but I wasn't too sure when I first started reading this. I was like, this is going in a weird direction, and then I fell in love with it, as I do with all of Holly Bourne's books. This was a weird experience for me to read as well on a personal level. It kind of brought up some stuff from a previous relationship that I wasn't expecting, and I found that quite tough to deal with. So I would be aware of that as well. It's just kind of the strength of her writing is that it's so realistic. And I said this about her other book, her other adult book, How Do You Like Me Now? She's so good at capturing the reality of things being bad. So things they're not like dramatically bad, if that makes sense. They're kind of the bad that most people will usually experience in day-to-day life. And that's a bit of a weird phrasing. I'm not trying to downplay sexual assault or anything, but a lot of the sexual assault in this book discussed is the kind of grey area stuff, and I'm using those words sarcastically, but hopefully you're not misinterpreting what I'm saying. But basically, yeah, this book is amazing. If you love Holly Bourne, you will love this book. If you don't love Holly Bourne, I recommend reading it. This would be perfect for Mental Health-a-thon in May, if you can deal with the content. Obviously make sure, protect yourself. It's intense. I struggled, and I wasn't expecting to struggle, so be aware of that. But yeah, it was incredible. I loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. It's probably going to be a 5-star read soon. Like, eventually it'll be a 5-star read when I reread it, but for now it's 4.5 stars. After reading that as well, I did reread How Do You Like Me Now by Holly Bourne, which is her other adult book. This is her first one. This is about a woman called Tori who is essentially like a public speaking figure. So she's known for a book that she wrote in her 20s about how being in your 20s sucks. She's like an inspirational icon amongst women, but she's struggling to write her next new book. Her relationship is going downhill rapidly. They've been together 6 years. It's not a good relationship. and it's basically about her struggling with her life. Yeah, I read this after I read Pretending because I was just in a Bourne mood, and I clearly just wanted to rip my brain apart even more by rereading this book. I'm not going to say much more about it because I did talk about it quite recently in December, I think was when I buddy read this. So I'll link the wrap up below where I talk about it in more detail. But basically I love it as well. This is now a 5-star read for me, and Bourne continues to blow me away. The next book I read was another arc, and that is Something is Killing the Children. This is volume 1. It's got a couple of different authors there at the top. I don't know if you can read them. This was a graphic novel about a small town where something is killing the children. A bunch of children have been murdered and some are still missing. And there's this, I think she's meant to be a teenager, but she's like late teens. It's hard to judge her age. But she comes to town and she speaks to this boy who saw his friends die, and she's essentially like a monster hunter. That's the premise of the graphic novel. This was kind of disappointing. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, which is low for me for a graphic novel. This was an arc as well, so again there'll be a full review, but essentially the artwork wasn't anything special and the story wasn't anything special. So it has some really cool elements in the story, but it doesn't, this is still volume 1, so I don't want to be too harsh on it, but it wasn't original enough for me to grab my attention. It has the promise of doing some really cool stuff further down the line, but I've read so many similar stories like this, so many similar horror stories and various things. It's not a new storyline. So it really needed to do something to grab my attention, and it didn't manage to do that, sadly. So I did really enjoy it, but I doubt I'll be continuing with the series. It was just a bit of a shame because I think it's going to go some really cool places, but I don't necessarily want to invest the time it would take for me to follow that. But yeah, it wasn't bad, it was just okay. The next book I read was another great arc, and that was Strangers by C.L. Taylor. So it's a thriller, as per usual, by C.L. Taylor. This one I gave 4 stars to. Yeah, 4 stars to. It's got a cool idea. This is basically the story of 3 people. I'm struggling to remember the detail of the plot, but I know there are 3 characters, and one of them has kind of got some issues going on. I think she's like a shoplifter. The other one, yeah, I can't remember. I'll link the review down below where you can actually read what the plot is. But basically, this had really great writing, and it's like the perfect example of stories intersecting. There's like a trend in thrillers at the moment, or in several thrillers for a while, where you read what seems like several separate stories and then they intersect in a thrillery way. This nailed that formula. It was really good. You didn't know how they were going to intersect. When they did intersect, it was really satisfying, and it dealt with that properly. It didn't kind of cram it in at the end. And yeah, it had a lot going on. It was just really neat. It was very, very carefully plotted and very carefully woven together, and you can definitely tell that. What let it down was it didn't have enough. It sounds weird because I just said there was a lot going on in it, but it didn't have enough in terms of grabbing my attention with the individual storylines. And that was just kind of it, really. Yeah, it's sort of lacking in the thrillery part of the thriller elements, which isn't necessarily a flaw, but the other main problem is that they felt like there was too many characters. So there are 3 narrators, but this is the penalty you pay for not having them interact until the end, is that each narrator had several characters surrounding their lives, and it felt like there were way more than 3 main characters. Even though there were only 3 narrators, it felt like there was more people you had to keep track of and pay attention to, which is a bit of a shame. There was just slightly too many. But yeah, it's still a really good thriller. C.L. Taylor's writing continues to be really good, and I would definitely recommend it. The next book I read is another arc, and it is If I Had Your Face by Francis Chow. This is unlike most things I've read, this is like a adult contemporary. I gave it 4 stars. It's set in South Korea and it's about 4 Korean women, and they live, it's kind of just about their lives, so it's sort of a character study. There's a lot of plastic surgery involved in all of their lives, and they are working as, I think they're called like room girls, so it's a very like cultural thing. I pretty ignorant when it comes to Korean culture. This book was like super interesting because of that, and the writing for this is its real strong point. It is written so well. I really loved the writing for this. I had some trouble keeping track of the characters, and I blame my own ignorance for that. I think that was my issue with distinguishing the Korean names, basically. So I do recognise that's probably my problem, but there were a couple of characters where I thought their place in the story was unclear to me. The main flaw of this book that stopped it being 5 stars was that it took about 40% of the way through the book before you had a chapter from each narrator. So there's only 4 narrators, and the end of the 4th chapter is like 40% through the book. And at that point I was really worried because it felt like I wasn't going to get much story, and I was correct. There's not really a plot to this book, and that sounds so weird to say. It doesn't need a plot. It works perfectly fine as it is. But I would have preferred that they cut out one of the characters, specifically, I think her name's Wanna, and she's just a pregnant woman in the building. And her story really went nowhere and didn't add anything to the other characters' stories. The other characters felt very tightly woven together, and her story didn't really do anything for me. So I would have preferred that her storyline was cut, and then that the more time was spent devoted to the other characters, so we got a little bit more plot. But yeah, this is definitely not going to be to everyone's taste. I was surprised I enjoyed it so much. It's not really my usual type of book, as I said, but the writing was so good. I'm really excited to see what else this author does, because I think she's really going to go far, hopefully. I think this is a perfect example of how to do a really compelling character study, and how books can not have a plot and still be good. The next book I read was another audiobook, and that was Smoke and Key by Kelsey Sutton. This I sadly gave 2.5 stars to. This is a fantasy book, and it's actually got a really cool plot compared to what I thought the plot was. So this girl essentially wakes up in this, I guess you call it like an undead town. It's like below the ground, and all of these people populate it, and they're all like kind of zombies, and basically she's woken up and she's dead, and every person has a significant item with them, and they become known by that item. So she is Key. She was found with a key around her neck when she awoke from her her death, and that's all I knew about the book. That's all the blurb says, so I'm not going to say a ton more. But this is a very different story to what I thought. I thought it was going to be a murder mystery. Oh, the other thing the blurb says is that people in this undead town, they cannot die, except for the fact that if they are burnt, or there's like another thing as well, maybe if their heads are chopped off or something, then they die again permanently. And she awakes in this town, and then people start to die, like people start to be burnt to death. And from that premise I thought it was going to be a murder mystery, and it kind of is. It's also kind of a romance, like quite heavily, which I wasn't expecting, and that kind of put me off quite a lot. Smoke in the title, the person in the title called Smoke is a guy, and they have like this chemistry. It had a lot of cool stuff going on, and I think if I hadn't listened to this as an audiobook, maybe I would have been slightly more into it, because it was a lot to kind of take in. But also, I just don't think it was my kind of story. It didn't really do the things I wanted to do. Like I said, the romance element was quite heavy, and I wasn't expecting that. And I wasn't necessarily super invested in the plot. or super surprised with what happened beyond it deviating from the premise that I thought it would. So yeah, it was alright. It's an okay book. It's got a super pretty cover, but alas, not for me. The next book was a wild ride, and that is A Match Made in High School by Kristin Walker. Sorry, you can't see these very well. I'm just going to turn up the brightness even more, so maybe you can see them. There you go. A Match Made in High School by Kristin Walker. This is a young adult contemporary. This is from years ago. This is an old book, and this has been on my TBR for years. This is about a high school where they introduce a compulsory, needed to graduate marriage course. And basically what happens is everyone gets paired up as a married couple, straights only of course, and then they have to basically go to like marriage counselling every week and do activities together, and there's a whole bunch of garbage requirements that basically mean they have to hang out with this person all year. It's an insane premise is what I'm saying. This book, I'm giving it 3 stars. The first half of this book is easily 2 stars, if not lower. It is trash, and not necessarily enjoyable trash. Everyone who knows me knows I have a soft spot for trash, but this is like, it's a lot. It's very cliche. The main character isn't a particularly nice person. She gets paired up with this awful guy, and they pull these awful pranks on each other. A lot of it was just too unrealistic to stomach. I mean, already the initial premise, like I said, is completely insane. But one of the first pranks this guy pulls on her, who she's now married to, is that he decorates a blow-up doll, like a sex doll, to look like her. And he shows it in front of the whole school, and the teachers are like, it's just a prank, it's fine. And I'm like, that's not okay. Having said that, the second half of this book was really, really good, and it's still trash, but it was good trash rather than bad trash. The characters went through a lot of growth. I really liked, in particular, not to spoil too much, but the interaction between our main character and the guy who was pranking her. Their interaction turns really, really good. I really liked the growth that they both showed, and that was done really well. And by the end I was completely sold. I was really invested in this little book. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because, like I said, the beginning was a lot. I almost stopped reading it, that's how much it was. And I have very low standards for my trash books, particularly books like this. So it's definitely not going to be for everyone, but I did really enjoy it and I was sold by the end. So I decided to give it 3 stars because it felt like a fair average of my opinions throughout the book. And yeah, it was just a nice book I didn't have to think too hard about. Next book I read was another arc, and it was What It Seems by Emily Bleeker. This is a thriller. I gave this 4 stars, and this is about a woman who has a abusive adoptive mother. She is now 20, this woman, and she's grown up under this abusive adoptive mother. And her only kind of joy in life is watching this family on YouTube. And one day this family on YouTube are hiring an intern, and she applies and she gets it, and so she runs away from home and goes to live this fake life with these YouTube people. But things are not what it seems, to title drop. This had such a great idea for a thriller. It's been a long time since I've read a thriller as unique in plot as this, and it was so refreshing. I thought it did some really interesting stuff. It kind of explored an aspect that I feel like should be explored in thrillers more, which is like YouTube and the internet and that kind of thing. And it did it really well. The beginning was, like, the first 3 chapters were bad. I don't know why they were bad, I just wasn't not interested in it. I felt like I'd picked up the wrong book and I was like, oh, is this not about what I thought it was about? I think I was just maybe in a bad mood. But either way, it started off slow is what I'm trying to say, and then it got way, way better. The problem with this is it doesn't push things far enough. So I really wanted, like, it's a thriller, I really, really wanted it to go dark. I wanted this YouTube family to be really messed up, to be really controlling, and like a lot of weird dynamics happening and that kind of thing. And it didn't do that. It was quite... There's still some dark stuff in this, but it doesn't go very far with it, and I felt like it could have really pushed the boundaries and used that thriller aspect to its strength. So that was a shame. The other thing is there's no twists in this. There's pretty linear plot, and that's not a bad thing. Thrillers don't necessarily need twists. I did a video on it actually, which I will link down below because self-promotion. But either way, that wasn't necessarily a problem with the book. There was one point where the main character has a realization, and that could be treated like a twist in that it felt like the narrative might be trying to do that. I assume it wasn't, because for me it was just so obvious from the start. It would be like if you're reading Harry Potter and then at the end of the Harry Potter you find out he's a wizard and you're like, well, yeah, what else was going on this whole time? So it's kind of that level of twist. And I really hope that wasn't intended to be a twist, because if it was a terrible execution. But I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt. I'm assuming that was a character realisation moment rather than a twist. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. It could have gone further. I wish it had gone further, but it was still a great thriller. It still had some really interesting stuff going on. And if you read a lot of thrillers, this is like a breath of fresh air in terms of the content, or at least it was for me, so that's always a good thing. Final book I read this month was All Your Twisted Secrets by Diane Urban. This just came out. This I found on Scribd. I was so surprised to find it on Scribd, because I'm a Scribd newbie and I didn't realise they had all the new books, and that's probably how YouTubers have been reading them. But anyway, this has a crazy premise. This is like, I guess you'd call it a young adult thriller. It's about this group of teenagers, and they get invited to a award ceremony or something, or a dance, or an award ceremony dance, just these people. And they go to it, and then they get locked in the room, and there's a bomb on the table, and there's a vial of poison, and they get told if they don't pick someone to die within, I can't remember if it's 1 hour, I think it's an hour, then the bomb will go off and kill all of them. And it's told alternating between what happened leading up to this incident in terms of like the whole school year beforehand, and then also it keeps flashing back to them talking about whether or not they can decide who should die, and if they do, then who should die. This hit all the right spots for me. I gave this 4.5 stars and I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much. If you like the sound of that premise, you will like this book. It is a crazy premise, I accept that, and it's a ridiculous one, but that's what I wanted from this book. The writing itself, it's not actually executed, like, it would not be fair to call this book trash, because it's not executed badly at all. It's executed really well, actually. It weaves like a pretty interesting story in terms of the contemporary side with what's happening with the characters. It's got some really cool reveals and stuff that I wasn't expecting it to have going on. And yeah, the only thing that stops it being 5 stars is the final ending is a bit much, and that's all I'm going to say. But apart from that, I really enjoyed this. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it, and yeah, I really recommend it. It's actually genuinely a really good book, and it hit all the right spots for me. So yeah, so those are all the books I read in April. I will probably split up I might split up my other reviews, I might not. I will go back to the standard half review format now if I can get back into the routine of filming, because this was a long video. I apologise for that. If you have read any of these or would like to read any of these, let me know down below. If you have any recommendations based off these as well, that's always fun. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, it helps me out massively, and I hope to see you next time.